How's it going? My name is Alex. I am one of the co-founders at CharmVerse. CharmVerse is a Web3 operation platform. Think of us kind of like a notion for Web3 with targeted specific use cases that you need for building Web3 communities, from things like managing members, helping you set up better governance, but also have some of the core collaboration features like creating documentation, tracking tasks, but also like turning the tasks into a bounty and so on and so forth. Really leveraging different power of combining productivities and Web3 serving particular sort of DAO or token community use cases.
Yeah, my name is Michael. Alex and I actually met in New York, and we were at like a dinner that we both sort of organized in New York City. So you guys are interested in like crypto dinners in New York, let us know. But I ran DAO, which is like a database that runs on top of the blockchain. And we just started talking and thought that this would be like a cool idea to sort of share with people, to say how like we thought this was like an interesting collaboration. So we wanted to sort of get people's feedback on it. Before I started DAO, I just finished my PhD. I was at Stanford. I was studying natural language processing and how to convert between like AI, like natural language and code. So you could do like program synthesis, just using like what you say. I got it. Oh, you got it.
So I think we talked here from the audience and also like from some of our colleagues and friends as well, that like there's this excitement around DeSci, around how to leverage like blockchains and token around research. We figure we'll show maybe an example or a framework to think about what's sort of the next layer of like rubbers meeting the road, like when you need to build community, what does that mean and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we took inspiration from like the space DAO a lot. It was like, okay, we have this idea, and someone asked this question, like, okay, have you guys started a DAO, or like, how do you want to start your own DAO? And I was like, oh, we're still like thinking about how to do that and something. So this is kind of imagine like a continuation of like, once you have the idea and once you have the funding and like, how do you start to like, what does building a community look like, and what does like collaborating on a data set look like? What is like granting different access control look like? And just sort of like brainstorming on some of those ideas. Okay, yeah. So we were looking at sort of like the current state of like what research looks like, and like especially as it relates to like clinical trials and publishing. And on one side, you have like this very like what we have now, which is like the Encyclopedia Britannica style of academic research, where it's like you collect a data set for like one thing in particular, like for clinical trials. In the most extreme case is like you have to go to the FDA, you have to get approval, you have to recruit patients, you publish in Nature. But then there's also this like other approach of doing science, which is becoming more interesting. It's like Patients Like Me websites, where it's more like grassroots, and Patients Like Me is this amazing website of people who are just sort of saying free form, looking to find community within groups, and saying like, oh, like I have this rash, I'm not really sure what's happening here. When I eat broccoli, that causes inflammation, it causes not inflammation, like whatever. And it's very bottom up, which I like a lot. Of course, this like introduces a whole other set of confounding variables, which is fine, but they just have to be understood. I think, a big thing we have to understand in the DeSci space just in general is understanding where the new uncertainty is in these new types of data sets, and not trying to compare them directly with existing very structured data, but sort of embracing a lot of the ambiguity that kind of exists. And I think like using AI and large language models is a really great way to do that, as was mentioned in the last talk. And other types of things, and like there's another type of sort of differentiation in research is how this research gets created. So with Nature, there's already like this strong ontology of research topics and acquiring funding, but then there's other things that are a bit more out there, like psychedelics or something. And an example of that is this website called Eurowind, where it's all bottom up evaluation of different psychedelic drugs, and there's no one who's curating that data set at all. It's just very free form, but it has its own sort of new types of information. And what I really like about this second set of like community curated academics and clinical trials type things is it sort of like lowers the coordination costs for these other things. Like running these clinical trials is very expensive. It costs $10,000 more a patient. Whereas with these other things, it's kind of free. It's self-report. People have more skin in the game too when they're the patients. So in Stanford, there's this big concept of like patient-to-patient medicine. And the thing that they noticed a lot about it was that like patients who are sick are way more interested in like figuring out what's going on than doctors who, you know, spend like 10 minutes or something before they have to run off to the next person, and they can invest a lot more time. And what we see is like a really big thing with crypto is like sort of lowering the coordination costs for patients to find each other, but also like closing the loop. So, you know, if with things like patients like me or Erwin, you know, you have the data, but you haven't like tied that back that to the longer term incentive of incentivizing the people, creating IP, getting money, getting funding, and all these things. And so I think that's like one of the areas where like there's going to be like first tier value creation. So yeah, and the other things is like when you open source it, you have it makes things more accessible. People are incentivized. You have different quality metrics and different demographics, but each of these are just new factors that have to be that we think are going to be really important in like understanding these new variables in this data set. Yeah, so I think this is just this little slide that like I don't think it's almost like a new type of research. It's not like in the exact same way as existing research. Like we hope to get like emergent behavior out of this research where it's not just trying to replicate things that are published in archive or published in existing journals. Like what we were talking about in the last talk was creating like small snippets of things that are independently verifiable and almost like tweet style research where like, you know, each claim is much more easy to verify. And there's lowering the participation. And one of the other things that I think is going to be important is like figuring out how to do like ethical research in these types of things. Like when you're doing open research, maybe you need some sort of like IRB review system so that you don't get people doing research that might lead into a bad direction. So I think that's something that's going to have to be determined as well.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of these things that happen on chain.
Yeah.
How do you think about like gas?
Oh, I think those will go down in cost, and you know maybe you can run a subnet on Avalanche or something, so it won't be too bad. Good question.
So with that, right? So just want to highlight before we go, like why using Web3, right? Actually, I think earlier when I was chatting with you earlier, like why not just do these things like Web2 or like traditional way, you're using websites, so right? But I think given blockchains and token, you get a few superpowers. Really being able to align incentives, being able to the people that are contributing to the project, right? In both in a potentially monetary way, or in terms of like governance, or in terms of like prestige, that is very high what you can see, right? Which then you tie to like reputation, right? Then you can actually think about like who are the ones truly contributing, who are the ones that are helping out, and then being able to elevate those individuals. Related to that, curation. That I think DAOs particularly started off, and a lot of that today is still true, that you are voting based on the token holding. But maybe that's really not the best way to go. That just because you have a voice doesn't mean the voice should be equal. I think like the more knowledge, expertise, and contribution that you bring to the table, that you'll be able to like weigh some of those in terms of your maybe reward, but also governance decision. And then finally, still bringing the fact that you could have a much better decision-making and governance process that from deciding on really anything, right? On like how your research project should be going, which biotech that you want to sell your data to, all of a sudden a lot of this decision now can be made as a collective, and then for people who contribute. So
how have you found people building community? So Alex runs CharmVerse, which is like this notion. How is community? I think we can learn something from like how people build community and like those existing projects that you're sort of familiar with. How do you think that those could be like mapped onto like the DeSci space?
And So community building is a Web3 thing, but it's also a Web2 thing, right? So some of the things, some of the tactics or like best practices really don't change too much on like finding an area that are interesting to this particular group of people. And I would say that it is more important to find sort of your 1,000 true fans and like find people who are really, really passionate about this particular topic to help, even when that particular group is much smaller versus the, like instead of trying to get your first, 100,000 people, find that first 100 people that really care, that can be ambassador to your project. I think that's a lot more better way to bootstrap the project and enable it to be scaled in a more organic manner.
So for like the groups that you have, do you find like, I mean, we have a Discord that has like a lot of people in it. Sometimes it feels like the discussion is like a little too big. Like, have you found that like these DAOs start in real life, or they are mapped from an existing social structure and then they come to find CharmVerse or DeSci, or how does that work?
So I would, it feels like a lot of you are creating early communities, and like my recommendation would be like, try not to model your community to some of the existing like really large DAO. I think like it's just human nature that when you have just 20,000 people or like 50,000 people like in one Discord, it's not really a community. Like community, it's very hard to care for, community member number 4,865, right? Like it's just not really how you get to know each other. So I think like we certainly try to facilitate smaller group pods or sub-DAO or whatever you call it, even though if your overarching research project require more people. But I think being able to divide and conquer and really, again, building the true community to the word, I think makes a big difference.
Cool. It maps into the thing that's we talked about previously with the structure influencing the communication.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So again, super high level. How do you build a community? How do you engage them? For the particular data that you care about for your research, how do you build the incentive mechanism to collect the data that encourage the patient or participant or user to participate? Finding the right way for your community to collectively govern, make decisions. And then finally, yes, you get to the point of sharing the wealth, that having the right mechanism so it's as fair or at least transparent as possible. So again, we talked a little bit about building community. So this is some screenshot actually from CharmVerse on, one of the first thing that I've seen a lot in DAOs or like token community is that all you have is a PFP and then a username that you really don't know each other at all. So like first thing I would encourage you to do is to find ways to, you can use CharmVerse, you can use other things, but like find ways to, so that each member even get to know each other. From basic things like, where do you live? Or which state do you live in? Or which country do you live in? Right? Being able to like leverage each other's, or having an opportunity to even build friendships or be able to help each other out. I think that's super important as a start. Other places to do things that like posting content that makes sense to the community, and then enabling the members to share their experience as to build out this initial community. So give people a reason of why they should show up to your community on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. But particularly if you have been in any kind of DAOs, you see that like it's easy to go in and like particularly in the start you get excited, but then like 2 months later, it's very hard to continue that engagement versus that people moving on to a different community.
Okay. Okay. So this relates to like once communities start building data sets, like this kind of relates to my experience with like DBDAO is like the first pieces of content have marginal value because one piece of data alone isn't super valuable, or two pieces of data. So this is as a data set starts to be building. But then we see like the value in Web3 is as you sort of get to 1,000 or 10,000 pieces of data, the sum of the parts it's because the data begins to have more value than the sum of the parts. And so this will help to sort of lower the coordination costs of it. So if people are trying to put a lot of data into a database and people are sort of getting rewards for their data, one thing that is very important is making sure that the data is of a certain quality. So we have this idea of like a curator. So if people are part of CharmVerse or some Notion or online collective, and then they start to begin to generate data sets for results, and they're being rewarded for their data, okay, I'm going to be rewarded for my data. What am I going to do? I'm going to try and put as much data in there as possible to try and increase my rewards. So how do we try and prevent that? Is we have this idea of like a curator, and the curator's job is to like maintain the quality of the data set. And we think that the curator doesn't have to be like one individual person, but instead the curator is kind of like a black box or like a multi-sig. So what happens is this curator is in charge of either accepting or rejecting it. And the curator can this multi-sig can take the form of a DAO. It can take the form of an AI bot. It can take the form of a team who's coordinating. So like maybe we all work for a company. And if 2 of the 3 people in the company agree that this data should be removed from the data set, we can do that. And another interesting mechanic that we introduced here is this idea of putting a deposit on your data. So we want to try and prevent spamming on the data set. So what we do is we have people deposit like $1 when they post the data. And if the data is accepted, they get their $1 back. But if the data is rejected, if the data is spam or terrible content, they get slashed. And the other good thing about this curation principle is you can have multiple people curating the same data set. So you're sort of incentivizing people to compete to be the best curator. So if some curator reneges or becomes malicious, you can track that back and you can say, okay, this person's terrible, but don't worry, there's another one. And this is sort of this is like a similar concept to having like laboratories of democracy. So this is how like the United States is supposed to function, is that each state creates their own laws, and the laws that are the best will attract the best people. And similar here, by having this sort of friendly competition between curators, maybe who are curating different projects, and not having it all go through a bottleneck, you'll have data sets that could actually be higher quality. So now that we have like this is the problem we were trying to solve, is like, if people are getting something of value, the idea is like people are doing work to get data into this data set, and they're getting something of value. What are the different types of value that can be created? Basically, we sort of came up with this ontology of like people can get status. So today, people publish papers, and you get status if you're on the paper and it gets accepted into a good journal. You can also just get cash, like USDC. If you're a patient participating in a program, you get paid money for your participation. But I think the things that are interesting about DeSci is the ability to potentially get equity. So if a drug is discovered based on part of your data set, you can get equity in the long-term value that drug has. And what's interesting about DeSci also is that all of these things can be sort of blended together as well. So you can get a partial package that's set in the smart contract of the status, cash, or equity combo. So what are these things? So how do we do this? Is each of these different things is basically tokenized. So like a stable coin for USDC, impact certificates are another interesting one. So sometimes people, instead of status on a paper, you can get an impact certificate where it's like, oh, I participate in this thing. I get an NFT, and then I'm going to post that NFT on my profile to show that I participated in this. So for example, if you submitted a lot of data on the first that was included in the first self-driving car, people would be very happy to show that perhaps on their profile.
So then how do you engage with the community? So there's like kind of 2 major ways. First one is finding those ambassadors, finding those leaders. How do you do that, particularly in a Web3 native way, right? So first is like about expanding that access and really giving them ability to do more things. In CharmVerse, you can set it up so there's like maybe your basic contributor is a view only access, but then your core contributor can have like write access or create access. So really empowering them, right? Making sure that like they feel that ownership, not in a token sense necessarily, but like in the day-to-day collaboration sense, like that this is their project too, right? And then related to that, being able to provide membership status. That I personally am a big fan of thinking about NFTs as membership back. It's not necessarily collectible, but simply that showing that you are part of this club that that you contribute to, that you have shown that like, you're helping out. Right? And then like as the community participate and contribute, finding ways and establishing processes to sort of promote and highlight these leaders, give you a chance to, again, like an incentive in a human sense of why would you want to contribute to this project. But then related to that is like, okay, then you can also leverage the tokens to reward behavior, right? So from basic things like using a bounty feature of either paying a DAO token or paying a combination of like DAO token plus stable coins, whatever, that just tweet about the projects, bringing people into the projects. These are things that you can natively use, particularly when used properly and knowing that people are not scamming you, be able to really sort of supercharge the growth of the project in the beginning.
So this is actually what kind of got us, Alex and I, talking initially, is like Alex had this platform that was for basically community, and I had this platform that was for data generation. And we were saying, okay, like, wouldn't it be cool if, people were rewarded based on their contributions? So we have this way, DBDAO has this way of curating high quality data sets. So what if instead of just sort of anointing leaders based on some other metrics, you anointed them based on like, how many rows did you get into the database that were successful? And then that gives you sort of governance powers on would be Alex's platform. And then you'd have this sort of like meritocracy, you'd have this sort of automated meritocracy where people who are contributing and are active in the data creation or community process would have governance rights over or higher or different community different status within the community.
Yeah, so I think like token gets really exciting, and then you can choose to reward your community based on behavior. Like you don't have to give tokens for every single little thing. Like you could choose to for like high value activities. For example, like contributing your data set, contributing your data into the core data set. But it's above and beyond that, right? And you can there are other activities that you can also reward, again, both reputation as well as financial. It's about being flexible and like what do you want to optimize the community for. So there's a few tools out there right now. There's a lot of tools out there right now. But some of the tools that we particularly like, we recommend you to check them out. Is that like if you are wanting to do more like proper proposal voting, but don't want to pay any gas fee, Snapshot is a great tool. That like many DAOs use snapshots. If you are wanting to like having better governance when it comes to like transactions, use NoSysAid. And using CharmVerse, you can also use NoSysAid directly like off CharmVerse as well. And then last thing, we talked a little bit about this idea of like sub-DAO or like pods, right? Like small teams, like staying under the number of like 150 people. Metropolis used to be called
Orca.
Good at like creating pods, which are really like a community with a shared treasury, or with a shared NoSysAid specifically. So easily kind of like spin up communities that you can manage with your research.
I think another thing that's interesting is each of these projects is going to have a different governance structure. So some things the PI might be more involved, or some things will be like more hands off. And the types of how the voting and governance will be done is going to be very dependent on just the nature, the dynamics of the research. Okay, so say we have all this data and IP that's in the database and how we want to distribute the rewards. These are just like, that would be set. This is an example of how this is a concept we borrow from DAO, is like, okay, we have this data set and it begins to monetize. How do you split the rewards? So you could split it 10% by the PI, 60% by the researchers, 20% by the subjects as an example, but this would be split. And I think it's also interesting to think about how we reward people who contribute data. So there's many different ways of doing it. One is to just like the database gets $100 in value and there's 100 rows, each person gets $1. Perhaps it's done by a query though. So instead of giving it equally, what if one person's data has been touched a lot more and you just measure that based on a per query basis? You can do it that way as well. And then lastly, there's this concept of a shapely value. So some data just might provide more incremental information to a data set. So if every color in a data set is blue and then someone inputs a red color, the amount of new information that is provided by this red color is much more valuable. So you can also pay people based on sort of the dynamics of the individual pieces of data that they contribute to the database. And these are just different ways of sort of paying out different amounts to based on the different quality of data that's out there.
Yeah, so again, really want to, I think super early when it comes to DeSci, so we just hope that we will encourage you a little bit about, there's a bunch of tools out there today that you can use right now in building your community by following hopefully this like slightly lightweight, 5-step framework to start to build, engage the community, get your research going, and like really actually making DeSci real. And yeah, remember some of these so Web3 superpower is about enabling transparency. It's about aligning incentive based on tokens and reputation that you can provide. And then like really sharing that ownership at the end of the day. I think like that's what makes it super fun and exciting.
Sweet. Thank you.
Any questions for the gang at CharmVerse and DAO? Maybe if we jump back to your 5-step. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. As someone who has, dug through a lot of health records, contributing to databases, it's not always easy, and it does take a long time. And traditionally, the acknowledgement for such work typically gets passed on to the PI. So I think really what you're doing is really cool and emphasizing the contributors and letting them benefit from it, not just from publications, but actually financially. One thing that the question is, this does not incorporate healthcare data, though, right? This would be kind of more consumer data. Is that correct?
I think initially it's for public data, similar to Bacalao was talking about. With DBDAO, we can do encryption on certain parts of it. So it depends. It probably wouldn't touch HIPAA though, because that's hard to do on chain for a variety of reasons. But we could, additionally for like self-report stuff, I don't think that needs to go through HIPAA. So it depends on more specifically on the use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good distinction. And then the other question, I guess, would be, this should be really good use for characterizing benchmark data. To compare something to, because most trials and most experiments now have to basically run a control, whereas the control should basically already be characterized, right?
Yeah.
No intervention should already be known, and this would be a really good tool for that. So you really just run a treatment group and compare it to a very, very, very large powered control group.
Yeah, like establishing a baseline.
Yeah, baseline.
Yeah.
Actual decline in certain functions.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that's a great, just like baseline use case of it is to just collect large scale data on some benign thing and seeing like what is the average temperature of people, so you can detect if there's an infection very easily or something.
The seemingly uninteresting aspects are often not well reported, and then you have to go out and design an experiment to measure something that should already be characterized.
Yeah, I like that. And getting back to your thing around like the credit going to the PI, one of the things we chatted about was like having different things, like giving credit specifically. So right now on existing papers, the attribution is sort of in rank order, which doesn't, and then confusingly, like the most important person is typically at the end. And, an NFT could include something of like the specific contribution to, was this person responsible for the idea? Was this person responsible for doing the data visualization? And getting very clear attribution for different parts of the experimental process or contributing data or anything like that.
And I know that the lowest ranked person, the person with the least amount of degrees on the paper, probably didn't do the paper.
Yeah. And I like that idea about the baseline. Actually, that's very good to know.
Super exciting. I hope we can collaborate with WeChain, because your shared ownership of wealth bits, we're getting really excited.
Oh,
I've
yes.
never thought about that, like, valuing higher the unique data points in a set or the most used data. It's really
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
I mean, I guess it's less of a question and more of a comment and follow up on everything else everyone's been saying, but this seems like almost even a way to the way that individuals are able to own their own data and go through and monetize their own data, sort of generate have this concept of like a UBI just based upon your own personal data. It seems to be maybe a way for communities to sort of do that, to generate intrinsic value at the community level.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, it's less of a question, if you have any comments or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll take the first one, then I'll hand the mic. But so basically, like we were proposing and implement this on DBDAO, and on DBDAO, every piece of data is an NFT that you have ownership of, and that equity flows to you based on the usage of your NFT. So yeah, so as you contribute more, you are the owner of that NFT where the data flows to you. And yeah, you can definitely monetize it as well. So what's also interesting is because it's an NFT, say you're making $1 per month based on your data usage in something. Then you can I can sell that to Alex based on 10x the yearly revenue. So I can sell it to him for $120. And then he's now the owner of the future cash flow in that. So you can sort of also, because it's all tokens, you can definitely use it to create like a stream of UBI. Yeah, that's probably the future might be the future. And then
Sorry, can you repeat the second question? Or like, yeah. But so I think for me it's like because not every piece of data has the same value. Right. So I think like being able to start to think about like what are the ones that you would want to spend in assigning NFT to, so that like that actually have, you think, with future value minus the gas fee. I think that will help really drive that the truly value exchange of like data versus like now we're just thinking about always like, well, you gave all your data to Facebook, but that data probably doesn't worth a lot to you, honestly. Right.
So I heard is that your individual user is worth maybe $7 a year on Facebook.
Right.
It's really a lot.
So the turning everything into NFT piece, I think is really interesting. What you're saying about if the value of the NFT increases, you can sell it and someone can use that and earn money. What happens though when the value decreases? Then people will just sit on the NFTs, and then your entire database is filled with people that are down right now and they don't do anything. Then you just have a dead database at that point.
Well, the data of the value of the NFT is backed by the IP that's inside that NFT. So how that data is, the price of a Bored Ape is based on what other people are willing to pay for it. And so I think like IP that's embedded, that's encapsulated within an NFT is probably much more stable than the fluctuations in Bored Apes. So yes, they could go down. The value of a patent that is no longer useful is worth less, and but it's still a database full of less valued IP. So I think it will be worth less, but I don't think that's too big of an issue.
Maybe I could follow up on that one. Any chance you could go back to your original slide where you're talking about the patients being more interested in the outcomes than the doctors? I think it was, the current state one over here. Because Bill, we were chatting about this earlier, right? Where you're focused on rare diseases, correct? And, in that case, like maybe there's not going to be a great study that's done for it because there's not so much commercial value after the fact, but the patients really, really care about that. Bill, would you want to say a few words on your perspective on it?
I don't know how to I'm happy to go and say a few words. I don't know how to solve the problem. I mean, it turns out the real issue that comes up is if you have a rare terminal disease, rare sucks because there's not a big market for it. And terminal sucks because you don't have a lot of time to solve the problem. So you go, and so motivation is tough to go on and get all the people inside this and even to go on and contribute. And then at the point that they go on and put the data in, incentives suck because they don't really, people that are dying don't really care about getting money for usage of their data. They want to stay alive. So the incentives are kind of skewed a bit in this kind of a model.
We were having a discussion at lunch, actually. I mean, there's multiple incentives in, I think like that's one of the, there is of course money. So when an investor invests in your company with cash, they expect cash back, but I don't think that's the only method of thing. I mean, as Bill just said, like, time is the most important thing. So if there's other ways of creating time for people, that is an insanely valuable thing that could potentially be unlocked with crypto. I don't know.
The one thing you can give people, which I do care about, is purpose. Okay, so if it turns out, in fact, you've gone over and have made a contribution that matters, especially near the end of your life, to go on and defeat a foe that's ultimately defeated you, people buy into that a lot of times. So, but still, it's a tough audience to sell to. And it's a yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alex.
No, I don't think Web3 is a silver bullet to all these things, right? But I think like one thing for that particular case I can imagine is that one of the more difficult thing is distribution, right? Or just finding it's just not worth it or financially difficult to find all the patients that have that particular condition. So I think like being able to leverage tokens or other means, reputation to encourage to bring people into the community, hopefully that will amplify the number of people that you can bring into the study and so on and so forth.
I'll add one more anecdote and then pass it up. My dad had a liver transplant 30 years ago before the space was far along. I remember, he was able to survive longer than anybody thought, but he was basically practicing science on himself. He was treating himself like an experiment and literally like measuring the grams of lima beans that he was going to eat at meals and things like that. And all the data from his self-study is nowhere, right? Nobody can actually benefit from that because there was no mechanism for him to share with anybody else.
Yeah.
And again, he was interested in saving his own life at the time, and he was super motivated. And maybe if we can make these tools available and find those communities of people that are like them, that they can share it and make it available for the future.
Yeah.
I have one comment. The supplements crowd. Okay, it turns out there's an incredible market out there for supplements. People are going on and taking this, that, and the other to go on and change their blood biomarkers to this, that, and the other. It's not recorded anywhere. Okay, so having a self-reporting mechanism in fact might be a great way to go on and do this, starting with supplements. So.
I mean, that gets into the baseline that you were talking about earlier. It's like having a baseline for supplements like vitamin C or D or these things that have been tested over and over again with marginal success. And if there's a strong baseline, maybe a large enough N, that would work.
Any other questions or comments for Michael and Alex? Getting any other bits of your histories, backgrounds, Web 2, Web 3, anything that you guys are led you to this moment?
I am an engineer by background, been started coding as a developer for a defense contractor where you put software on defense drones. Although for the past 12 years, I've been building startups. CharmVerse is my first Web3 startup. Before that, I started 2 AI company, both VC-backed, exit, and so on. But yeah, super excited. When I started to interact with DAOs and other token communities and kind of really seeing this possibility of letting people to truly interact and work across the world and then truly being measured by your impact and really sharing that ownership that really have nothing like it before. So I think that's super exciting for me.
Before I was at Stanford doing a PhD, and before that I was an undergrad there in computer science. And then I thought just Web3 was cool from a technical perspective, and it seemed interesting. And then we sort of looked around and I saw this use case, which could be interesting as well, to enable new styles of web applications to be developed that gave partial equity into the people that were contributing the data to them. And then we sort of got connected around DeSci and became here.
Michael, are you part of the Stanford blockchain community?
I was, yes. Then I graduated, but I guess still. So I'm an alumni member.
They had that Science of Blockchain conference.
Yes.
It was really good.
Yes.
I was having them on slides earlier because they have a really strong program. That's exciting.
Yeah. I was there as well. So, yeah, we did.
And Alex, maybe you could just comment a little bit on what it's like being an entrepreneur in sort of different fields and how you're seeing, Web3 as separate from the AI world.
Yeah, I mean, so at least particularly for my journey had always been like, there is a technology shift, and again, from my past two companies, that were more in AI, and then like applying that new technology to solving a set of real problems. And that's certainly what I get excited about Web3 and or Web3 now, right? Because I feel like blockchain or token, whatever, 5-8 years ago is a lot more speculative and just purely trading. I am super excited about the idea of building this worldwide computer, right? And then that's really not possible until somewhat recently.
How about from just general fundraising climate, running a company, experiencing the crypto winter now and all that stuff? Any parallels to things that you've seen in the past, or
Yeah.
seems like?
I mean, first of all, I think we're both pretty lucky that we raised our money before the crypto winter. So in a way, it's awesome. But I mean, I do think that it is a better time. I mean, everybody said it's a good time to build, but I think it really is true, because like when everything is just something that you buy the token and then it goes up, it's very hard to tell like what is the true. Talk about like product market fit, right? Like, are you really getting product market fit that by solving a problem, or you are just getting a lot of excitement because people want to buy your tokens, right? So I think like being in this time, at least right now, I think give you a better chance of like figuring out, are you solving a real problem, and believing that like if Web3 is real, then the next bull market will come, and then you're just better set up. Having the right product, solving the right problem, and now as everybody's like, again super excited about
Please.
Oh, what was the question?
Sorry.
Fundraising. I mean, I was a PhD student, so being a PhD student before is very different from running a company. You have different deadlines. It's actually, I think it's just a different set of challenges. I don't think one is better or worse. One is more academic, but also coming from PhD land, I know all the problem. I feel like I know a lot of the problems that exist within decentralized science and the different types of incentives that are out there. So I think it's like there's a low baseline in terms of reproducibility and different ways. I think one of the things, I don't think it's better or worse. I think we're going to create a different type of science, honestly, where it's it's solving different problems for different use cases. It's like sort of comparing like a truck and a car. Like they both travel forward, but they really have different use cases. I don't think we're probably going to use DeSci to solve like insanely complicated things where you need a lot of domain expertise, potentially. But maybe it's better for like broader Wikipedia style things. But I could be wrong on that, so we'll see.
Let's go, right? Let's give one more round of applause for our speakers. Great.